for the second talk, we have none other than Bartek Kiepuszewski, who is the co-founder of L2Beat. Please welcome him on the stage.
Hey everyone, I'm so stoked to see you all here. I mean, it's just amazing. Our journey at L2Beat, it all started about a year ago. And I would never imagine that this is where I would be in 1 year. And for all of you, I guess, this is the place to be if you're interested in scaling Ethereum, if you're interested in rollups. And there's everybody here, right? When I think about it, I'm a little bit like afraid that hopefully we all stay safe because. If anything happens, there'll be no scaling Ethereum, right? But if you're interested in rollups, every single team is around, so please do talk to them. Please do find out. Please do find out what they're doing and ask about your concerns. And I'm going to present our concerns because, we've been watching all teams, we've been watching all rollups, and our goal at L2Beat was always to provide not just an overview of what's happening in terms of total value locked, but also was to inform users about the risks and the security trade-offs. And I think personally that this is something that we really need to understand in a system that was supposed to be created for adversarial environment, right? So that we don't have to trust. We can look at the code and we can see what's happening. And I think the challenge for all of us is essentially to translate terms and concepts that are technically quite complicated into something that's understandable for end users. And this is what we're trying to do, and I'm going to show you more or less the journey and what we've been through and what we think is ahead of us because we know that new players will come and new developments will have to be analyzed and new security trade-offs will have to be properly understood. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples, and I'm going to show you how it all happened. So it all happened about a year ago, and it all happened, as always, with MakerDAO. Obviously, MakerDAO is like the OG of DeFi and on Ethereum, so formal verification and this style of coding, I think that's loved by a lot of projects. So I'm very proud that I've been with MakerDAO for 4 years. But we came to a point where we needed to essentially move DAI to multi-chain. And it turned out to be a very interesting problem. It was not as easy as for other protocols that we could just copy-paste MakerDAO to other chain. But we wanted to make sure that the way we did that was to make DAI fungible across domains. And if you want to make DAI fungible across domains, then suddenly you realize that if your DAI sits on a chain that has a very weak security properties, suddenly that becomes your weak point, right? That becomes your attack vector for the whole system. And we wanted to fully understand what are these security trade-offs. So I did a lot of work looking at the available rollups at the time and created this big spreadsheet, presented the spreadsheet to the internal team, and except to our internal team, no one was really interested, right? And what's the life cycle of such spreadsheets, right? They just get forgotten very often. So we kind of published it. And first, we published it as a very simple website, and we also thought that it would be cool to put some numbers. And then, very quickly, we published this spreadsheet as what we now call the risk framework, which is essentially an attempt to explain to users what are the security trade-offs of all the solutions. And that obviously created a lot of controversy. Some teams came to us and they said that they don't agree with the assessment. Some teams said that their assessment is fine, but the assessment of their competition is definitely wrong. Obviously, some teams that were not rollups wanted to make sure that I included, and they did not agree with our definition for rollups. So we were like attacked from everywhere, and we created almost like a fortress. But then we came to realize very quickly that this is not up to us, right, to decide. I think what we need is to sort of create some sort of a, I don't know, community common framework of how we call these things, and we started to call things with certain terms, and I think certain terms stuck, right? Dankrat, before he mentioned forced inclusion, he mentioned escape hatches, and frankly, I'm really glad to hear these terms, because about a year ago or 2 years ago, no one even knew what it was. And we use these terms extensively with some understanding, and we kind of assume that there is some understanding amongst the audience that people would actually know what they mean. At least that's what we thought. But the reality is actually more complex, and as you can appreciate, I mean, the rollups are very complex beasts, and this is what we ended up with. We started with a simple framework. We wanted to explain to users what happens with their funds when the operator is censoring, when the operator is down. And then, indeed, there was an incident, which was not very untypical. So I don't want to really pick Arbitrum here, but the fact of the matter was that there was a sequencer down event. I think their sequencer was down for, don't remember, maybe 12 hours, whatever. Doesn't really matter. And there was a very interesting Twitter discussion. What does it even mean? And most people kind of thought that they can still transact through L1. They can still withdraw funds through L1, even though the sequencer is down. They, I guess, needed the UI, and they even assumed the L2 bit is going to supply such a UI. But the truth is that this is not possible. I mean, when the sequencer is down, you cannot withdraw your funds, right? When the sequencer is down, there's actually nothing you can do. I mean, you have to hope that the sequencer will be back up, because the forced inclusion mechanism is for anti-censorship resistance. It's only when sequencer is up and actively censoring on transactions, then you can force your transactions through L1. Some rollups, well, some rollups have these features that actually allow you to stop the rollup entirely if the rollup doesn't really answer your request, and then you will be able to withdraw your funds, right? But that would be almost like saying, well, the whole thing does not work, we need to freeze it, and that's it, right? Other rollups may have this facility that if the sequencer is down for an extended period of time, then you may be able to launch another sequencer. But this is all complicated. I mean, that's my message, right? I'm not like going to argue what's possible, what's not. What I'm trying to say is that, it varies. It varies across different solutions, and the devil lies in the details, right? So in this particular instance, we wanted to change the way how we actually deal with, how we describe this risk framework. So we came up with a different setup. Now we're trying to talk about the sequencer failure, the validator failure, but then again, what is the validator in ZK rollup? What is the validator in optimistic rollup? I mean, these terms are different for different constructs. And again, I believe that this current risk framework is kind of limited. And also, we may be mistaken in some of the assessments, right? But the point I'm trying to make is that we do need this information, because I think it's important not for just for the users, but also for the protocols and for the overall community, and also for everybody else to understand what's going on. So, and why you can only go so far? And the reason is that these constructions, they do look similar, but they are fundamentally different. So for example, typical, and again, when I say typical, that doesn't mean that all these constructions have to look like this, but typical ZK rollup, they would have such roles. They would have sequencers and provers. They may be called differently. They very likely have some operator. They may have some additional roles, such as data availability committee, security council. I mean, these are the type of things that you might hear about, in context of ZK rollups. But you won't hear about independent block validators. You won't hear about block proposers. So it is a little bit different, right? So roles are different. Then the way they operate is a little bit different. Again, typical optimistic rollup, I normally think of them as almost like a two-phase commit protocol type of construction, where sequencer, they will like push transactions on chain, and by doing this, users will get this notion of transaction finality. But then, after a while, the sequencer or the block proposer, they will post the state root. So there's this period between posting transactions and posting the state root, during which users actually have finality, interestingly enough. For ZK Rollup, this is not the case. Typically, users, they do receive what we call an instant confirmation, like a soft confirmation, but then we wait up to a few hours, actually, for the prover to post state root along with the proof. And until that point, the user's transactions, in theory, can be rolled back, right? So users, for most intents and purposes, I mean, they live in a bit of an illusion. In MetaMask, they do have transactions confirmed, but in fact, this transaction may end up not actually in a rollup. And the worst case scenario is that proof cannot be created, and we need to revert these L2 blocks. So again, this is a little bit different construction from the operational point of view. There are certain different dilemmas. ZK rollups may be incentivized to post state roots not that often as optimistic rollups because it costs a lot of gas. For optimistic rollups, on the other hand, there's a different dilemma. And the major concern is the cost of data availability and posting all the transactions. So again, not trying to get into the details. I mean, you'll learn about these rollups, soon from different rollup providers. But the point I'm trying to make is that maybe our common framework that we designed for all constructions, maybe we need to break it down somehow, right? Maybe we need to change the way we describe things and stop pretending that every single rollup can be described in the same terms, right? Maybe we need to create a different way of thinking about it. Then data availability, that's an interesting one again. I mean, for most people, it's all the same thing, right? But in practice, what we found is that even though ZK rollups have a choice where they can post either full transaction data or what we call the state diffs, so not full transaction data, but just the information how the state changed, virtually all of them decide to post state diffs because it's cheaper. And this is how they want to position themselves via optimistic rollups. Optimistic rollups don't have that choice. They have to post full transactions. But for the end users, this is entirely different end result. Optimistic rollups, they give you full transparency. They give you full history of transactions, essentially on-chain, but they don't give you much of a privacy because of that. Whereas ZK rollups, they like quite the opposite here, right? And again, not everybody understands that, and suddenly we're starting comparing apples to oranges when we sort of like simplify or oversimplify the reality. Finally, we've got the huge upgradability problem, right? And again, we wanted to somehow simplify this. We wanted to like warn users what's upgradable, what's not upgradable. Again, turned out that this is way more complex than we initially thought. So when we say there's 14 days delay, I mean, it is almost true. However, every time we dig deeper, it turns out that there's something extra, like there's some extra piece of information or piece of architecture that may not have this 14 days delay. So in this particular case, there's a rollup. I think it's mutable X or whatever. Doesn't really matter that much. That indeed, the main rollup has a 14 days delay. However, there's only 0-day delay on the verifier, right? Which is like buried in like deep down, and that has a very important consequences. And finally, anti-censorship. Again, normally we think about it that you should be able to force your transactions through L1. That is typically the case for optimistic rollups, but that may be problematic for ZK rollups. So how do you deal with all this complexity? So our proposal is essentially to come up with like an upgrade to the risk framework and continue educating users on this complexity, but to find common terms. And the reason why we actually trying to do this is that we want to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where people normally would believe that if you, let's say, if you're a ZK rollup, you cannot steal users' funds. I mean, fundamentally, this is not true. I mean, if your construction is correct, then this is true. But who checks if your construction is correct, right? There's way more to ZK rollup than just ZK proofs, than just math. So we don't want to have, like a rogue rollups that will eventually rug the users. And these are the questions that we'll be asking current and future rollups, and I think these questions are relevant, and I think these questions, we have to find a way to present this information somehow that is digestible to end users. So for optimistic rollups, that's the typical setup. We've got sequencer that appends transactions. There's a block proposer that appends state batches, and there's independent block validator, right? This is this mysterious entity, the full nodes that they have to watch the whole construction, and if anything is wrong, they will be engaging in submitting fraud proofs and in the challenge, right? So this is super important. You don't have that entity, you don't have that role with ZK rollups, and we have to answer ourselves like, what's going to happen if the sequencer is censoring, right? What's going to happen if the sequencer is down? Can users process the transactions? And if so, how? Can they run their own sequencer? What if the block proposer is done? So the append sequencer batches, they all succeed, but no one is submitting state roots, right? What is the situation of the whole rollup? And finally, can anyone run block validator, or is it a permission role? That's also very important. We want to end up in a situation where everybody should be able to run the block validator, right? Which is not the case right now for most rollups. And then for the ZK rollups, turns out that you can try to think about them, in a similar way, but they are a little bit different, right? Because there is no block validator, but we do have a block prover. We've got a different entity, and maybe for them, this is not as important for end users to be able to run them. You may not need to decentralize them as much, but again, you need to ask yourselves, what is the consequence for users' funds and for the security of users' funds when the sequencer is censoring, when the sequencer is down, when the block proposer is down, what are the consequences, and can anyone run prover, or is it a permissioned role? If I cannot run the prover, what is the consequence of the whole construction, right? Because when I cannot run the prover, then obviously the block proposer won't be able to submit state batches with proofs, and then what? What is the next step, right? What's going to happen with users' funds? We know some of the answers for the existing constructions. We don't know what are the answers for the future constructions. And we all know that these are important questions. So I'm not going to go through the details. But using this risk framework, you can see that some of the existing rollups, they look good. As you can see from those green check marks. For some, right now, I think we still have some work to do. And we're going to have a great panel right after my talk where teams can answer the current state of decentralization. And you're going to see that we all have training wheels, right? We still are very centralized right now. And we need to find a way to present all this complex information to users. So we're going to use very new design, but we also are going to have a lot of new features, right? We're going to look at the different rollup parameters, not just modules, not just components, not the architectural diagram. We're going to look deep down into them, and we're going to present to users all the internal parameters that we think they are important for the security of users' funds, right? And we're going to monitor the chain to see why and when these parameters changed. So you may see here, these are the parameters, I think, of one of the forks of Optimism. I'm not even sure if this is Optimism. It doesn't really matter, but you can see that there's some very mysterious parameters like L2 gas discount divisor, something like that, right? I think it would be nice if you could explain to users what does it really mean, and should we actually watch these parameters? And should we be concerned if these parameters suddenly changed, right? And who can change them? And is there any warning? Is there any delay? We're going to also be looking at the Rollup history, and we can pull all the data from chain, which is super nice. And all the Rollup providers know that we can do it. And we will be displaying all that information to end users. So this is the, I think, the history from Mattis, if I'm not mistaken. And if you can see here, I mean, this is a fine print. But in April, not that long ago, actually a week ago, Mattis went through a really significant upgrade. And they changed something, right? Now, question is, I mean, what did they change? I mean, was that change for good, for end users, or for bad? So clearly they claim, and I think Matt is going to explain all that, today, that they have reduced significantly gas fees. That sounds super nice. The open question is, what is the security trade-off? Right? There must be probably a trade-off. I mean, you would think intuitively that there is a trade-off. What exactly is the trade-off? This is an open question. I will leave it all up to you and to the discussions. But there is a security trade-off. So let's see how Mattis thinks about it. But again, my point is, we should tell the users that this is something that's happening, and we should tell the users if they are happy with it, and if they feel that they're not happy, maybe they might go somewhere else, right, where they need a more secure construction. I don't know. So maybe they need something like this from ZK Sync. There's an upgrade, and there's a warning, right, and users have some time to migrate. So maybe the ideal situation is that we need weeks or maybe even months, right, of a warning so that we can actually move our funds. And I think our conclusion at the end of the day is that we can't do it alone, right? It's impossible for a small team, however well-funded, to actually do it alone, and we need to find a way to make it a community effort somehow. And I'm not trying to hire anyone, because I think that in this room everyone's trying to hire everybody else, so it's just not going to work, probably. But, I mean, I think we need to find a way to create some sort of a community, and we need other projects to help us to contribute. We need to be more open source. We need to find maybe a DAO or whatever. And this is the future of L2Beat, and this is the future of, I think, our space as well. Thank you very much.
We have one question, and I think it's a very pressing question. So I'm going to demonstrate something which is going to become important later. This is a catch box. I'm going to throw it and hopefully not kill anyone. OK, I didn't kill anyone. Speak, yes?
All right. OK, so you illustrated there's a lot of variance with all the rollups. And I'm wondering if you think that is more just because we're all in this development stage, and over time we're all going to converge on the same construction, or you think maybe even at the logical conclusion of the development of rollups, that will also be very multivariate and very confusing?
Oh, sorry. My personal take is that rollups do compete, and they will try to compete, and some of these areas will be used as a way to differentiate. So on the one hand, I'd love to see certain standards, maybe, but I'm old enough to know that most standard initiatives failed, and I'm not really sure if we are gonna do any better. So we'll see, right? What I'm sure is that we probably should expect the multi-chain reality, multi-chain future, a lot of rollups, and hopefully a lot of healthy competition without predatory behavior or whatnot, right? So I personally believe that we're going to see a lot of innovation in these rollups, and the trade-off will be that we have to learn the little tweaks and details and the differences, and this is why we need something like this to help users understand what's going on behind the scenes.
Thank you, Bartek.